Hey everybody, welcome to the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Jeff Erickson here with Eric Romoff from Pros with Joes. You can read him at Dr. Roto and goingfor2.com. This podcast, as always, is sponsored by WynnBET, WYNNBET. Appreciate their sponsorship all season long. It is a news-heavy day, as always. There's some news, injury news. There's a lot of roster manipulation going on, a lot of stuff going on. Eric, it's kind of tough right now to stay on top of everything. We're all getting ready for our big drafts. We got Pros with Joe's next week, plus a lot of NFFC drafts this weekend. How you handling things?
Yeah, it's certainly a wild time of year, right? Like you mentioned, this is the midst of our big fundraising push. So a lot of things going on with the charity site, and it seems like every couple of minutes I'm getting another notification pushed to me about someone being released or someone being placed on IR. So it can certainly make your head spin trying to keep up with all the news.
Yeah, yesterday we were greeted with the news about Cam Newton getting cut by the Pats, making Mac Jones the starter, changing the value of a lot of the Pats skill position players along with it there too. How much did you guys bump up Damian Harris, for instance?
Yeah, so for me personally, I bumped him up inside of my top 20. I had him around running back 27 previously. So I think the first question you have to answer with Damian Harris is, were you in or out on him previously? Sure. And if you were, I think most of those people are looking at him as that sort of back end RB2. If you weren't, then he's maybe a fringe bench player, now moving into flex territory. But for me with Damian Harris, I mean he's flashed on the field. We've seen a large enough sample size of what he can do there on Sunday, and removing the threat of losing goal line work to Cam Newton is just an incredible lift for him, right? So I understand there's questions around Stevenson, JJ Taylor, what role they're going to play, but ultimately he should have first crack at those scoring opportunities, and that just lifts his upside considerably.
I think my interest is tempered a little bit in PPR leagues because I just don't see him catching a whole lot of passes. James White's going to do most of that, and they still have Ramondre Stevenson too, just as a guy that'll be there as a fly in the ointment, so he can go Jonas Gray on us when we think that there's, we got that 1 week
for that one game,
yeah, and then he'll sleep through his alarm on Tuesday, and then we'll never hear from him again. But that's okay. I have him closer to about 23, 24. Like I'll still go Javonte Williams over him. I'll go Swift over him still. I'll go Sanders, Montgomery. I think where the rubber meets the road is like Gus Edwards. Very similar type of profile back. I like the Baltimore offense better than the New England defense, so I'm still leaning Edwards myself. What say you there?
Yeah, I think it's a favorable comp, at least for me right now. I've got him a few notches ahead of Edwards, largely to do with the uncertainty around that roster in Baltimore. Now that cut day's behind us, we get to the weekend and there's no considerable movements from Baltimore in the running back department. I'll probably pull Edwards up a little bit, but ultimately I think they're going to be right next to each other in my rankings come week one.
I think they're in the same. You're definitely shopping at the same store when you're looking at those guys there. It's interesting. Baltimore hasn't added a back yet. Latavius Murray didn't get cut. Rashad Penny didn't get cut. Some of our other guys that we thought might be targets out there that they didn't get dropped either. So I wonder what Baltimore is going to do, because I think they'll bring somebody in. I'm not sure who, but because Tyson Williams has a very similar skill set to Edwards, at least in terms of not being a pass catching back, more of just a between the tackles sort of guy. Maybe it's Justice Hill, but Hill's hurt. I just keep thinking, are we going to see Duke Johnson there? Who are we going to see that goes to Baltimore?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Logically, it would seem like they would have interest in acquiring someone. The name that comes to mind for me is maybe Wayne Gallman. Ultimately, whether or not it is Wayne Gallman who ends up there or someone else, I think it's going to be that caliber of player. So I think it's somewhat of a minor risk to the workload for Gus Edwards, but Todd Gurley is always looming out there. There are some other veteran running backs that maybe have up and coming rookies behind them on the depth chart. Where things could get mixed up. So that uncertainty is certainly one that has me a little bit more hesitant, or at least cautious around Gus Edwards. But if I had to place my money somewhere, I think it's probably a replacement level back at best.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just the type of back. What's the fit? That's the thing I keep digging at there, trying to find. Because, I even look at Gallman. Rookie year, he caught 34 passes. So maybe he's capable. And in his college years, 3 years in college, 20 plus, in the 20s all along. I don't know. I mean, we don't know for sure. If Gus Edwards can catch passes or just doesn't. I think that's the other tricky part.
Yeah, it's certainly a question mark, right? And the thing to really shake things up there is no matter what happens, the best case scenario is Gus Edwards is in a split with his quarterback Lamar Jackson, right?
Right.
So I do think it's fair to try to pontificate as to whether or not he'll adapt and take on some of that role in the receiving game out of the backfield, but his volume is just by nature of who's sharing that backfield and the signal caller capped. As he partners up with Lamar Jackson back there.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't see too many huge earth-shattering roster moves yesterday. We saw, besides Cam. I think that was the obvious one. Maybe one of the more interesting, intriguing ones was Tyron Johnson going to, getting cut by the Chargers, getting picked up by Jacksonville. They cut Colin Johnson, who then got scooped up by the Giants. Just playing that shell game right now. I guess maybe John Brown getting cut by the Raiders, except he wanted him to cut him. So, because it looked like he was getting aced out of a role. Was there anything that jumped off the page to you, like any big roster move yesterday that you're like, oh, that could be interesting?
Yeah, at least in a direct sense, nothing too earth shattering, right? But I do think that we can follow these roster moves and glean some information about what it means for the team overall. And specifically, the one that comes to mind is who you mentioned, John Brown. When there were legitimate questions as to who was going to be the wide receiver 2 there in Las Vegas, there are reasonable projections that had John Brown leading that team in receptions for the wide receivers. Now that he is heading out of town, it seems like that is a strong indicator for the camp performances of both Bryan Edwards and Ruggs there in Las Vegas. So. For me, I'm ticking both of those guys up in my ranking, and specifically Bryan Edwards. I mean, you can get this guy for next to nothing, right? He's basically free. He's well into the teens in terms of average draft position. So if he's going to have a regular role, given what he flashed in the preseason last year, I do think that there's some interesting upside there with him.
Yeah, I've seen a little Twitter buzz on Bryan Edwards. I know there's a couple of people on him, like John McKechnie is big time on Edwards. I know that from Rotowire. But yeah, you're right. And a lot of people are on Ruggs. I think Jeff Mans on SiriusXM was talking all the time about how he can't not draft Ruggs. So each of those guys has his patrons. It's just a question of where, like you said, though. And I would tick both of those guys up. I agree with you. And I think they're going to try to spread it around a little bit less emphasis on Waller this year. One of the reasons why I haven't ended up with Waller anywhere so far this year.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of him either. I've got a couple of shares specifically where I'm trying to sort of toy with the texture of my roster a little bit. But ultimately, right. I don't have a lot of exposure to Waller. I actually wrote an article, a profile for the Raiders for drroto.com, and Waller himself was actually my regression candidate, right? I don't think that he's going to slip outside of the top 10 or anything crazy. But you look at just how efficient and how prolific that year was last year, and it's reasonable to expect that he will regress to the mean and maybe finish somewhere in kind of the 5-6 range. So I think it's an astute point that the distribution should be a little bit more balanced from Derek Carr this season. Yeah,
I've been going Kittle over Waller, although usually I'm getting a receiver in that spot, unless it's late third. And in one case, Friday night, I got Kittle late fourth, and
oh wow,
it was a max pick sort of thing. It was like, okay, I got to do this. I got to be flexible enough to accept the bargain. I think that's. I know we all have our guys. Sometimes you have to accept what the room gives you, though, too, or at least look into like, okay, why are they giving me him? Oh, well, there's no reason. Okay, I'll take him.
Yeah. At least for me, especially as we quickly approach week one, right? We're 7.5 days or so from kickoff on Thursday night next week. As I have a more and more complete picture of the teams that I've drafted so far, I am more apt to jump on a value that's sitting there in the draft that maybe I haven't been targeting thus far. So I don't have any Kittle. My concerns are more to do with just how run heavy that offense is and the number of mouths to feed. He's still the one, but Ayuk is going to whittle away at him. So is Debo. They have plenty of pass catching backs out of the backfield. So I haven't found myself with a lot of Kittle, but as we get closer to kickoff next Thursday, my teams get increasingly different from the sort of baseline that I've established.
Indeed. Circling back to the Raiders just a little bit more, you mentioned Ruggs and Edwards. In the NFC since Friday, Ruggs is wide receiver 55, Edwards 65. I expect both of their respective prices to go up maybe 5 to 10 spots each. I'd say more Edwards will take a bigger leap than Ruggs, but I think both will move up a little bit.
I think that's a fair look, especially in the NFFC, right? It's a very sharp pool.
Right.
And the sort of general consensus is that when there are two comparable players on the same team at the same position, most people go for the least expensive option. So it makes sense that Edwards is probably going to see a bit more lift there. But among the everyday players, I think there's a lot of people that are just generally avoiding this Raiders offense, apart from Waller, of course. So, if we look at ADP outside of NFFC, I would imagine that the movement is going to be a bit more subtle.
Yeah, probably so. I'm going to be in Vegas on Saturday. We'll find out. I'm doing the NFFC Classic, the 14-teamer. So I bet you that's going to be a get the guys.
Vegas, Jeff?
What's that?
Did you just invite me to Vegas?
You should go. You should do have you ever done the NFFC? You should totally do a draft there. If you can't do a live one, jump in an online championship or something like that. Greg runs a great show. Greg Ambrosius runs. It's really a great product, and I can't wait. I met a lot more of the baseball folks, but I know the football folks too, and they're great people, and I just love doing like a live draft like that. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've done the online a few times. I haven't made it out to in person yet. I've got young boys, so sneaking out for a weekend's a little bit hard. But yeah, Greg runs a super tight ship. It's a ton of fun.
It is. Before we get on, a few more news items. A quick note from our good friends at WynnBET. If there's one thing we appreciate here at Rotowire, it's making good decisions, and even more so, making the right decision. Listen up, folks. I have an incredible offer for you with Rotowire's newest partner, WynnBET, the premier digital casino and sportsbook app. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. WynnBET brings you the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WynnBET's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down in blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 6 states: Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. WynnBET is currently offering all Rotowire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for Rotowire's fantasy podcast. I'm here with Eric Romoff from Pros with Joes. You can read him on Dr. Roto. You can read him at goingfor2.com. You can follow him on Twitter at FantasyNAV. Eric, let's talk a little T.Y. Hilton. News just came out right before the pod that he's undergoing surgery for his neck problem. He's going to go on IR to return. They don't expect it to be a long-term absence, but this gives us a little bit of definition. It gives us a period of time when we know he's going to be away for us here. It's not going to be a week or two. It's going to be longer than that. What does this do for you? How are you? Are you bumping up Pittman? Are you bumping up Paris Campbell? What are you doing here?
Yeah, so of the two, I think this definitely moves the needle more for Paris Campbell, right? I think some of the volume logically goes over to Pittman, but I also think that it comes with more attention from the opposing defense, right? So somewhat of a wash as I do the calculus for how it impacts him. But Paris Campbell now presumably steps into a role where he should have consistent volume week in and week out. I'm not rushing out to acquire him in kind of shorter formats, right? I'd say at minimum, kind of 12 or 14 team leagues are the range where you should consider a player like Campbell. But we're only a few years removed from him being a fairly well graded second round pick by this Indianapolis Colts team. So now with a bit more opportunity, I do think that this move to IR for T.Y. Hilton certainly ticks up his upside and his involvement in this offense. The Colts are obviously dealing with question marks about their starting quarterback and Carson Wentz availability. But ultimately, it looks like Pittman is the one who's going to see the biggest upgrade with the T.Y. Hilton news.
Yeah, for sure. Erd Smith out for the season, most likely with meniscus surgery. This one hits me. I actually liked Erd Smith a lot this year. He was one of my targets if I waited on tight ends. He was a guy that I really thought I'd get a lot of this year, and obviously now I'm running for the hills. But the Vikings traded for Chris Herndon. Have any fantasy interest in Chris Herndon at all?
In terms of fantasy interest in rostering Chris Herndon, not really. Fantasy interest that I think it's a lot of fun to watch all of the Chris Herndon stands cape up and feel like their guy finally has an opportunity again.
Assemble. Yes.
Yeah, right. The Chris Herndon signal is out there in the sky. But for me, the signing of Herndon, really means a little more than just proof positive that the Vikings are planning to not have Erd Smith for the duration, or at least the majority of the season. I'm like you. I've been waiting on tight end almost the entirety of draft season, so I have a lot of Erd Smith. So this one in particular was a bit of a gut punch.
Who's your pivot? If you're drafting in pros versus pros with Joes next week, who's your wait on the tight end pivot?
Yeah, I think for me, at least looking at what Erd's ADP was previously, I think the first thing to consider is just going tight end a little bit earlier. It gets real murky after that Erd Smith fall off, right? If you are in a deeper format, if you've already rostered Smith and you now need to go comb the waiver wire, a couple of guys that I would consider: Austin Hooper. He had kind of an up and down season in his first year with Cleveland. He obviously missed some games to injury. But if you look at the back half of the year, week 14 and on, including the playoffs, he averaged 8 targets a week over that stretch. Keeping in mind that about 7 targets a week was good for second or third amongst tight ends. So ultimately, I think that there is some volume potential in what is kind of a short to mid-range passing game there in Cleveland, and Austin Hooper is widely available. The second name that I tend to look for is Zach Ertz, oddly enough. We're, again, a couple years removed from he being considered in that kind of Kelsey Gronk category, and largely because of the uncertainty about his roster status and whether or not he'll still be in Philadelphia, his ADP is just in the tanks. So you can get Zach Ertz for next to nothing. And looking at the preseason games, Philadelphia is throwing to the tight end a ton. Every single game, their tight ends combined are amongst the leaders in targets in the preseason. So I think they're in that Sirianni scheme. We're going to see a lot of tight end involvement, and to be able to get Zach Ertz, off of the scrap heap or as a last pick of your draft, there is some upside relative to what you're spending on him.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you a couple more guys that I kind of like too. I think Tonyan is actually getting talked down too much. I think he's like, oh, he was so touchdown dependent. Yeah, but what if he gets more targets this year because now he's in the circle of trust with Rodgers? And you know what? Maybe he still gets a good. Maybe he doesn't get 11. Maybe he gets 9 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns. For tight end 11 or 12 or 10, I'll still take that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tonyan is exactly the type of guy that I have in mind when I mentioned moving up a little bit from where you were planning on targeting Erd Smith. And ultimately, we're talking about tight ends. They're all touchdown dependent, right? Basically, apart from the big 3, maybe you can argue big 5, right? But apart from those guys, everyone is 3 for 33, and their week is made or broken by a touchdown.
That's right.
So it's fair to expect some regression, but ultimately that's the status quo for the position. So I think that takes a little bit of bite out of the argument.
Where are you on Kyle Pitts, by the way? Are you generational prospect guy and willing to take him in the top 6, or are you like, I'll wait till next year?
Both. I think he's a really exciting prospect, right? We see him catch one ball in the preseason. I think he had like 25 or 27 yards after the catch and just looks absolutely electric. And the devil on my shoulder makes me want to reach into the 5th or 6th rounds and acquire him for my team, right? On the other side, there is a ton of historical data that shows just how long that ramp-up period is for tight ends specifically as they elevate to the NFL level. So ultimately, it's a bit of a mood swing kind of consideration as to whether or not I'm feeling like I need a bit more upside on my team, and I'm willing to roll the dice in a player like Pitts, or if on the other side I've got upside elsewhere and I'm looking to find value at the position. So kind of a mixed bag, but I mean he looks absolutely electric. There's so many things to be excited about for this young man.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm excited to see him. I did get him in the Rotowire stake, salary cap draft league. Stopped at 14. I was like, okay, I'll take him. And that was fine. AJ Brown back to practice in a limited fashion. Julio Jones. At least we knew what was wrong with Brown. Julio Jones missed like 3-4 weeks with it undisclosed, and I never like seeing that, especially given Julio's recent injury history. All those on and again, off again practice reports during the season last year. Are you drafting AJ Brown at price? Are you drafting Julio Jones at ADP?
Yeah, so for both of them, I'm actually kind of out. At price, I think is the important qualifier. To our point about Kittle earlier, we get 10, 12, 15 picks after their ADP, and certainly, I'll take a look at those players. But in a relative sense, the guys that are around them, specifically for AJ Brown, right? I would much rather have Justin Jefferson, Terry McLaurin. I'm a big Allen Robinson fan, so even Allen Robinson falls into that category for me. And really, it's almost entirely a mathematical argument, right? This Tennessee offense was 30th in pass attempts per game last year. AJ Brown had a fantastic season, but he caught 11 touchdowns on 70 receptions. So that type of efficiency is just something that statistically is very hard to replicate. And now we have another significant mouth to feed in Julio Jones coming into town. So ultimately, I do think that he is a candidate for some pretty substantial regression. And that offense, time tested, is very low volume, high efficiency, and that usually lends itself to being exposed to regression.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm on AJ Brown. I think there's another level. He's playing hurt last year, but then again, seeing that creep up this year, pump the brakes just a smidge. I might have had him wide receiver 6, and now it's like wide receiver 9. I'm still taking him at the end of the second. I'm a little stubborn. I'm out on Julio completely, though.
Yeah, completely with you on Julio. And AJ Brown, I absolutely love the player and his talent. He's inside my top 5 in position in Dynasty. But in the 2021 spectrum, I think there's some things that might break against his favor, and relative to the guys around him, it's just hard for me to pull that trigger.
Yep, I hear you on that. Before we move on to talking pros with Joe's, quick note from our friends at Dynasty Owner. Are you tired of the same old fantasy football leagues that get canceled after a year or so? If so, Dynasty Owner has your back. Go to dynastyowner.com. New leagues for the 2021 season are forming now. Dynasty Owner unites the fun and excitement of fantasy football with the skill and strategy of the front office by incorporating a salary cap and real NFL player salaries for diehard fantasy football fans that want the real GM experience. Dynasty Owner adds a whole new level of strategy. Are you worried you won't be able to find anyone to play in your league with? Don't worry. Dynasty Owner can help you fill your league with fantasy football enthusiasts like yourself. You won't have to worry about finding enough players. You can just choose to start a league, join an existing, or purchase a team from a previous owner. If you're serious about joining the big leagues, go to dynastyowner.com/Rotowire and start your dynasty today. I'm Jeff Erickson. Thanks again to Dynasty Owner. Thanks to our Blue Wire sponsors as well. I am talking with Eric Romoff. You can find him at Fantasy Nav in AV. You can also find him at drroto.com, goingfor2.com, and of course, Pros with Joe's. This is year 2 of this great contest. I'm playing in it. I'm excited about it. Rotowire's Jim Coventry is also in it. He's a big fan of this as well. Tell everybody, Eric, what inspired to start you with Pros with Joe's?
Yeah, so our origin story is quite serendipitous in nature. Our eventual champion in year 1, Dave Richard of CBS Sports, on a podcast, I believe it was, he mentioned that he would be willing to share his expert league team with one of their listeners, and it seemed like that got a lot of traction. So that was ultimately the light bulb moment, that it seemed like the consumer of fantasy content would really covet experience and the access of playing alongside and co-managing with the expert that they know and trust. So we reached out to Dave and asked if he would be interested in participating if we kind of teased out this concept. He graciously accepted, and we were off and running. We were basically in every single expert's mentions and DMs there for a few days. Initially we were thinking we'd be lucky to scrape together, 10 or 12 people that wanted to participate. And in year one, it really took off. We saw 56 pros that participated.
Nice.
All told, we raised a little under $10,000 for a variety of different charities. So really took off like wildfire, and we're excited for year two.
Yeah, I'm excited for it as well. It's a fun concept. How many leagues do you anticipate running?
So this year we've got 42 in total. So we'll have 42 pairs of pro and Joe. So it's going to be 3 14-team conferences that all roll up into an eventual champion who takes home, or I guess their charity takes home the pot of money that we've raised throughout the course of the season.
And the unique thing is you can choose the charity. Each pro has their own charity. And I'm going with the Brain Aneurysm Foundation. My mom, she survived a cerebral aneurysm when I was 7 years old. That was a long time ago. She's still alive, actually, believe it or not. It's amazing. There's a 50% mortality rate. She survived it. And they do great work for people how to cope with it. And obviously the odds are a little bit different now than they were then, but it means a lot to me. So I hope to be doing a lot of good with that. And there's just a wide variety of charities that we can all support here.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite aspects of sort of the confine that we operate within, right? Is that every pro that's participating is representing a cause that is near and dear to them. It's touched their life in one way or another. So the fact that not only are we creating this avenue and this channel for industry experts to engage with their followers in a unique way, but they're also doing good for a cause that's really important to them, right? So you mentioned the Brain Aneurysm Foundation and how that touched your life. We have, like a lot of families out there, a number of experts whose lives have been touched by cancer or by cerebral palsy or Alzheimer's, right? So all these causes that certainly can use support in their continued fight and their research. And on the other end of the spectrum, all kinds of organizations working with rescue animals, rescue wildlife, abuse prevention, suicide prevention, right? So we really run the gamut of causes out there, and the most special aspect of it is that they are near and dear to the pros that decided to play for them.
Do you have a particular cause that you want to support?
Yeah, so I've actually got a local food bank here. I say local food bank. The San Antonio Food Bank is actually the largest in the state of Texas. It supports San Antonio and everything south of San Antonio, which in Texas is a lot of land.
That's a lot of territory. Yeah, I've been down there a couple of times. Yeah.
So I've been working with them for years, even prior to my involvement in Pros with Joe's, and especially over the course of the pandemic. I live not too far from there. As I'm commuting to and from places, running errands, whatever it might be, just seeing that hours-long line of people that needed food support and really, realizing how big an issue food insecurity is. So it's local, it's homegrown, but the reach, really impacts an entire region. So that's where I do a lot of my volunteer work. That's where I give to on a regular basis myself.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. What sort of format are we playing this year?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, it's a 14-team league, essentially 14-team conferences. Each conference has its own individual player pool. We are running it back with full PPR this year. Really, the only considerable wrinkle from last year is that we're going a bit broader in the roster format. So as opposed to rostering a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, tight end, and a flex, basically everyone will be rostering a quarterback and then 8 flex positions. So I really like the idea of introducing some agency into how these teams are put together. So that's a new wrinkle for this year that I'm excited to watch play out.
No super flex, just one quarterback though. Still
one quarterback this year. Yeah, with it being 14 teams, it would get very thin very quickly. So didn't want to turn the dial all the way up to 11 immediately, but depending on how it plays out, maybe we'll explore it for next year.
Listen, I keep pestering Greg Ambrosian's Tom Kesnick to introduce a national Superflex contest because I thoroughly enjoy the format. I just think that's the one thing fantasy football does wrong. Quarterback being such an important position. Why are we only starting one of them? Because there's one on the field, I guess, maybe. But, it just when half the quarterback pool isn't ever used, in many cases, a third of it's never even drafted, it seems wrong when we're digging for third running backs and fourth and fifth wide receivers on a team. That's just one of those pet peeves of mine, but I'll keep, that'll be my get off my lawn position that I'll be staking out there.
Yeah. I'll flag it for next year that I'll have incoming super flex requests coming from you in 22.
All right. Very good. Very good. Looking forward to that. And it is a snake draft. It's next week, late draft. So theoretically, we're going to avoid a lot of the preseason whammies, but whammies can happen in season too. So I like doing some early drafts. I like doing some late drafts. I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for people who say, well, that's why I never draft early. Well, things happen all the time.
Always. Yeah. For me, I've got a pretty good mix across the two, right? A lot of best ball and dynasty startups firing up right as the NFL season started and carrying all the way through the summer. For me, the counter argument to that's why you don't draft early is really one that gives an edge to someone that is researching, right? The value that you're getting especially in those mid-tier rounds, those middle rounds over the course of the summer is completely out the door once we hit late July, early August, right? So, yes, you are introducing a bit of risk that, more time can pass and injuries can present themselves, but you're also introducing a ton of value by doing, even a moderate level of research heading into these kind of off-season draft windows. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Anything else you want people to know about Pros with Joes before we start getting to know you?
Yeah, really just kind of from the top, right? Like I mentioned earlier, we are in the throes of our big fundraising push. So anyone that wants to check out what we're doing, the causes we're supporting, the pros who are participating this year, they can head over to our homepage, proswithjoes.com. You can also check us out on Twitter at proswithjoes. Or if you're in the giving mood and you want to get in on the action, you can go directly to our donor center. It's proswithjoes.rallyup.com. Again, see all 42 of our pros and the causes they're supporting. Make a donation, and you'll be entered to win the grand prize of co-managing with that pro.
Very good. Very good. So proswithjoes.com. You can probably see in proswithjoes.com or proswithjoes.rallyup.com, right? Did I get that right?
That's right. That's the direct donor center.
All right, cool. Check that out, guys. And please donate and bid on a chance to, join with me or anybody else that you prefer to join with and try to beat me for that matter. I'm good either way. Just donate. That's all we're asking for there. Before we move on, get to learn a little bit more about Eric. Another note from our friends at Sleeper. What do your fraternity brother Steve, Katie from work, and your grandma all have in common? They're all waiting for that invite to your fantasy football league. There is no better way to hang out, no easier way to smack talk, and no more customizable platform to host your fantasy leagues on this year than Sleeper. Whether you have a redraft league or a dynasty league that has been around for 10 years, Sleeper has everything you need in one app. Incredible commissioner tools and customization, built-in messaging, support for snake draft, auction draft, and best ball leagues, blazing fast news, stats, and scores, all in a beautifully designed mobile app and website that makes every other app feel like horse and buggy. Sleeper is the fastest growing fantasy sports platform for a reason, and all the cool commissioners are switching to Sleeper and not looking back. Don't just take my word for it. Download Sleeper on iOS or Android and see for yourself. You have nothing to lose. It's free. All right, my guest is Eric Romoff. We've been talking about Pros with Joes, which you can check out at proswithjoes.com. You can check out Eric on Twitter at fantasynav.com, or at fantasynav, excuse me. And you can read Eric at drroto.com. That's drroto. That's Mark Bloom, Dr. Roto. Great story. Mark, had to have an organ transplant. The fantasy community helped support him and supported him, gave him a new life, and he's back with his own website. He's a great guy. I'm happy to see him launch his new company. You're doing a lot of work for them. What are you doing for them?
Yeah, so Doc was one of our pros here in year one, and his story is phenomenal, right? The fantasy sports community saved this man's life. So there's just a lot of alignment in his story and what we're trying to do. So as he got ready to gear up and launch drroto.com, a partnership really made a lot of sense, right? We're looking for a platform and a home to house the work that we're doing through the website and to promote the charities and everything. And there is an altruistic and charitable aspect to everything that Doc is doing there at the website. So he's got a number of different charities that a percentage of subscriptions are going to every single month. He has these sort of content camps and kind of training programs for new voices and aspiring content creators in the industry that are looking to get their footing. So really the true north of finding a way to have an impact and give back is very much so aligned for both of us. So a partnership made a ton of sense. So in addition to our direct website, anyone that goes to drroto.com can find our information listed there under charities. We're doing a Pros with Joe's podcast every single week this year. So we'll be doing a little bit of a recap on the league, news and notes, kind of happenings around the NFL, and then spending some time interviewing a pro and their co-manager, talk about their charity and their experience playing together. So that'll live on the Dr. Roto podcast network. And then personally, I'm contributing a couple of articles throughout the course of the regular season there. So the partnership is something that we're super excited about and looking forward to getting kicked off here next Thursday.
If you consider yourself to have an area specialization of expertise in fantasy football, what would it be?
It's actually a really good question. I consider myself a bit more of a generalist. In terms of where I've focused my time and attention recently over the last few years. Huge fan of the salary cap format, and specifically, really started to shift a lot of my investment over to the DFS world. So that's where a lot of my headspace goes. That is the subject matter of a lot of the content that I'm creating, both writing and podcasting. So if I had to pick one, I think that would probably be the category. But ultimately, I try to keep a pretty well-rounded sort of mentality in looking at the game.
Absolutely. So do I. I mean, I don't. In fact, I could, if I had to answer my own question, I probably wouldn't have a specialty. It's just, I am definitely a generalist when it comes, not just, and I wouldn't even narrow that down to football. I'd say generally in fantasy sports. I just love sports. I love all I play fantasy hoops, fantasy hockey, fantasy golf. I have a golf league that's lasted over 20 years already. So excited about it. We're year 22 of that. So yeah, I like it all. Try to be a little well-rounded. What do you do for a living?
So I am actually in the technology space. I head up operations and growth for a small technology startup out of the Knoxville area. So we're specifically in the virtual events, virtual office world. So the last 18 months or so have been a whirlwind for us. I've been in the startup and the technology space here for about 10 or 12 years now.
That's fantastic. How young were you when you started playing fantasy sports? Were you in high school? Were you an adult? When did you start playing?
I was fresh out of high school. I'm in San Antonio, Texas. I moved here to go to university after high school. Got a part-time job at a mattress store. I was the poor guy that was lugging mattresses on my shoulder and throwing it into people's trucks and tying them down. And at one of our area meetings on a Saturday morning, there was a big commotion, a big group of guys that got into a bit of an argument. And because it's how things always play out, it was about fantasy football. So it kind of started poking around there. I was familiar with the concept before, but that was my entry point into playing. I was the ripe old age of about 18 years old.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. The funny thing is, I'm old, so it wasn't as big of it. It wasn't easily accessible as a kid when I was in high school. I didn't play in high school. I played right after college. I graduated in 93, though. So I'm dating myself a little bit there. So my first fantasy leagues were in like 93, 94 in baseball and football. But actually, I was in law school and I started a basketball league, or at least I played in a basketball league. And then I think I started one after that. But anyhow, it was like those three were all like in rapid succession with each other, and I just got hooked. I think I remember reading about it in Sport magazine or Inside Sports. I forget which one of those. There's a good feature article about that, and it's like, oh, I got to do this. I definitely have to do this. This is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, for me, just kind of being the outsider in that group, seeing big commotion amongst fairly mild mannered people, like what is going on? Like what has things flared up over here? And they were arguing about changes to their constitution and a scoring format. I think they were debating whether or not to introduce PPR at that time because it was early 2000s. And just to see that sort of level of interest and passion around it certainly piqued my interest. And then over the course of the years since, just really zeroing in on the subtleties and the nuance of the game. I mean, there's an endless amount of riddles and puzzles that can be solved in this game, and that's ultimately what holds my attention.
Okay, very cool. Favorite team?
Do I have to say? Can I put a brown bag over my head? I'm a Houston Texans fan.
I'm a Bengals fan, so you don't have to do that. It's okay. In fact, you guys you've beaten us in the first round of the playoffs because we hold that Saturday afternoon slot together pretty well. So
yeah, first game on Saturday. It's a tradition unlike any other.
Yeah. And our respective coaches in that era are now gone, so maybe not anymore. But I'll say this: it's a tough time for you guys right now. I hear you, but maybe they'll come out clean on the other side. I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to boil down to whether or not we can find a suitor to fall in love with Deshaun Watson and all of the uncertainty and mess that comes along with him. And if so, our arrow could be pointing up again here in a few years. But in absence of that, we've been heading in the wrong direction for a while now. Yeah,
and you got to get through the cap woes in addition to Watson's legal case with the sexual assault allegations. I mean, yuck! What a mess. And ownership is what it is there too. I mean, hey, we have one other thing in common is we both have crappy owners too, so we got that going for us.
Yeah, and generations of crappy owners, right? Passed down from one to another.
Yeah. Well, Paul Brown was fine, but Mike Brown not so much. It's kind of sad. But favorite format to play?
So I mentioned it before. I'm a huge fan of the salary cap format.
Okay.
Ultimately, I like points and scoring. So full point PPR, any sort of tight end premium, I'm here for. I'm also a big Superflex fan. So really the thing, and I guess kind of exposing my intentions with the Pros with Joe's League. I like the idea of an owner having agency over their team. So the salary cap format obviously plays a big role in that, where you can target the guys you want, right, and make evaluations on whether or not that's an appropriate value and someone you want to get. And same thing with the kind of positionless format. So it's one that I personally like and may or may not have had a bit of a controlling interest in why I decided to roll it out for year 2 of the charity league.
Very cool. Very cool. Any bidding tips? I think one of us I think you actually muted yourself. There you go.
I think I had a mic go. So for me, it's really more about, it's almost kind of inverted from a traditional snake draft, right? I'm a big advocate for drafting based on tiers. And typically in a snake draft, the end of those tiers is where you start to find value, whereas the opposite in a salary cap format. So as a tier starts to dry up, that's where everyone starts to realize it, and those guys tend to go for a bit more of a premium.
Right.
So really looking for a strong set of tiers that I believe in, and staying attuned to how many players are remaining in that tier. And after one or two player goes, that's really where I look to try to capitalize in the draft and salary cap process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I committed the cardinal sin in one of my auctions earlier, salary cap draft leagues earlier, is that I got caught in that last guy in a tier. Javonte Williams, it was for me, and I had to have him because I didn't want to go down in the next level for my RB2. And fortunately, I had the budget to get him. I think I think one thing you learn from this, and we mentioned this on the show, if you do find yourself stuck in that situation, because you probably will at some point, make sure you win that.
Yeah.
Make sure you actually win that battle. I think, don't get to that last guy in the tier and then still don't get him. I think that's a real problem, unless you really are comfortable at the next level. But chances are you're not, because you're already at that last thing in the begin with there. So, anyways, I don't know.
If you're early in a draft, there's an opportunity to pivot if you miss out on a guy in a tier. But more than a couple dozen picks into your salary cap draft, if you find yourself in that position, you almost have to die on that hill, right?
Yeah. Who's your most frequently rostered player so far in draft season this year?
So I'm going to strike a little controversy. I have a ton of Joe Mixon exposure.
Okay, why?
So, like all answers that I'll probably give to those questions, a lot of it has to do with where he's landing in drafts and his overall price point. But for me, looking at his talent coming into the league a few years back, he certainly carries the ability and the upside to be a top performer in this league. And what we've always been waiting for is the opportunity for him to not be muddled by Gio Bernard. And so that opportunity has presented itself to us this year, and he's still available in sort of the 2-3 turn, even well into the third round. So, ultimately to get a guy whose volume alone should dictate that his floor is pretty close to that RB1 category, and his skill set is high enough to where he has upside to maybe even flirt with a top 5 finish on the year. That late in drafts, I have myself a ton of Joe Mixon, and that is honestly allowing me to get a bit more creative with my earlier picks, right? Go a tight end or a wide receiver earlier than I historically would, because he's just so consistently and readily available to me there at the sort of beginning to mid third round. Especially
as we've gotten later in draft season, when you see the Bengals offensive line, like, oh God, they're still the same offensive line. Part of the reasons why I only have one league so far with him, it was a auction draft league, a salary cap league, just the other day in Derek Van Riper's pentathlon league. So we'll see about that. I kind of was price enforcing, kind of got stuck with him. Like, okay, I'll take him. At least I'm going to get volume. Most prominent player that you not only have you just not drafted, but you will not draft.
Probably the biggest name that I haven't found myself rostering yet is Nick Chubb. I'm a bit torn by it because I think he's maybe the best runner or one of the best runners in the league, right? But on the other side of the Joe Mixon argument, he has that cap on his production, on his volume with Kareem Hunt there. I understand that even with Kareem Hunt there, he finished, depending on your scoring format, around RB 10 or 11. But there is a lot of efficiency that broke his way in how readily he converted his red zone carries into touchdowns in order for that to happen. And so to bank on that happening again, coupled with paying 7th, 8th, 9th pick off the board price tag with him, it's just a little too rich for my blood. I hate to see him go. Every time he gets drafted, I always wince a little bit, but I just can't bring myself to pay quite that much of a premium when it requires banking on a repeat performance of that level of efficiency.
Yeah, I hear you, but I mean, on the other hand, Kareem Hunt's been unusually healthy. It's not necessarily guaranteed that he's going to stay healthy. I think, if something does happen to Hunt, then Chubb gets those passes and some receptions too, and then he doesn't have to be as efficient. I just think he's really darn good. I think the offensive line is really darn good. I've been getting him a lot, around 10 or so in drafts. I'm okay with that. I take him over Eckler. I take him over Barkley even. Barkley's my guy, by the way, that I will not touch. There is a price point. I just haven't gotten to it yet. It's like a mid-second round price point for me.
Yeah, everyone's got a number, right?
Yep.
And to be fair, right, I'm not saying that Nick Chubb is to be avoided by any means, right? The places where I'm at the turn and he's available, I'm considering it and happy about that, right? But to have him fall kind of in the middle of that first round, again, banking on efficiency, somewhat projecting or hoping, some missed time for Kareem Hunt. There's just a lot of things that need to line up perfectly.
For sure.
And that introduces a little bit of risk in my mind.
I can appreciate that. We'll finish up rapid fire. A couple of user questions. Rodrigo asks, thoughts on Javonte Williams and Zach Moss. I don't think he's asking comparing the two, because Williams is going ahead of Moss every single time, right? But what do you think? What are your thoughts on Javonte Williams?
Yeah. Coming into the draft process this year, there is a lot of reason to be bullish on Javonte Williams. He fell into a pretty nice landing spot there in Denver, and watching camp and preseason progress, all the more reason to believe that his arrow is pointing up. So I've been targeting and find myself with a lot of Javonte Williams shares. Obviously, his price tag has been going up of late, but really the thing that tipped the hand more than anything for me is the fact that he was a healthy scratch for that last preseason game. Right, that is a huge indicator in my mind that Javonte Williams is going to be a player that is going to have at least the lead role in that offense sooner than most of us projected.
Yeah.
So to get him where he's going in drafts and potentially have either the lead or a bell cow role in the very near term is a really awesome value.
Yeah, I think so. And then what about Zach Moss?
Yeah, Zach Moss is a bit of a question mark, right? Presumably it seemed like he would lead that backfield, and that front office and coaching staff would try to strike a bit more of a balance between run and pass. But then you look at the game last week with Josh Allen, and he's out there throwing on every single down, right? I do think that there's some serious question marks about just how involved the running game is going to be in Buffalo. And a lot of the instances where it is, and certainly the most valuable instances there in the red and the green zone, the quarterback is now in the mix for those touches as well. So, if you're going zero RB, if you need some depth or you're in a particularly deep league, I think Zach Moss is fine to consider. But ultimately, there's a lot of things that are stacked against them in my mind.
I think so too. Clint Anderson asks, any Detroit wide receivers worth rostering in a 12-team PPR?
Yeah, following the cut of Perriman, I think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is someone that is interesting and carries some upside. Not to draw too much of a comparative, but it feels like there was a lot of extracurricular and off to the side work between Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown this preseason, like there was the year that Cooper Kupp came into the league there with the Rams.
It's a good call.
Yeah. Very much so. I think that there's kind of a possession volume receiver potential for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Personally, I was really bummed to see Perriman be released. I've been waiting for him to have a true opportunity throughout his time. Right, we've seen him flash when he's had opportunity or he's been covering for injured players. So to see him out the door, I think he's now the third in Chicago is where he landed.
Yeah,
that was a bit of a bummer for me. But now looking at the roster, it seems reasonable that St. Brown is in a position to lead targets for the Lions wide receivers this year.
Yeah, that vaunted Bears passing offense that we're all excited about there. One last one. Randall says, in a 10-team league, he just traded away CMC for Josh Jacobs, Myles Gaskin, and Jacoby Myers. People in my league are mad at me, he says. First year in the league, too. Should they be mad? Is this a stinker of a trade?
Yes and no. I think this is a bit of a stinker of a trade. So, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, especially in a shorter format, right? 10 teams. There's always that premium on elite talent, and that elite talent went out the door. It doesn't matter how many puzzle pieces you try to cobble together. It's going to be really hard to replace that contribution from CMC in your roster. The reason why I say yes and no is I'm just categorically not here for leagues griping about transactions and trades. I tend to think that collusion doesn't exist, and I tend to think that managers should have the agency to manage their rosters however they see fit. So not really looking for commentary from the peanut gallery from the rest of the league, but ultimately I think our guy was on the wrong side of this deal by a pretty good margin.
Especially in a 10-teamer. In a 12 where the depth matters a little bit more, I could see it. And I see if in that league, he was really hurting for depth. Like, say he had maybe CMC and Dobbins and I'm trying to think who else. Michael Thomas and someone. ETN. Those and then he was hurting for depth. I still wouldn't do it because it's a 10-teamer. I would just go for their replacements. I just scrounge the waiver wire. I would do things like that before I'd ever do that trade. But I understand. They shouldn't be mad at you though. They should be making you offers is what they should be doing instead. But
his inbox is going to be flooded.
Yeah, probably will be. Or hey, and he might laugh last. Who knows? Maybe Josh Jacobs reverts back to the form that we saw people taking him at the end of the first, beginning of the second last year. Maybe Myles Gaskin's what he did in Week 16. That's his true level. Maybe Jacoby Myers flourishes under Mac Jones. Maybe he's doing a lot of work there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
that's the problem.
In a 10-teamer, right? At least one, arguably 1.5 or 2 of those players are right around replacement level.
Right.
So that's really what informs the call for me.
For sure. All right, that's wraps up all the questions. Wraps up today's podcast. Eric, I can't wait to do Pros with Joes. I appreciate you taking an hour of your time with me here, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff. It's been a ton of fun, and thank you again for your support. Jeff is one of our 2-time pros. He played in our inaugural season. He's back again and again supporting a great cause in the Brain Aneurysm Foundation. We're
looking forward to it. Go to proswithjoes.rallyup.com. Go donate if you can. If you want to partner with me, I could use a partner. I'll even defer to your knowledge on this here. You're probably better than me anyhow. So let's check it out. Coming up tomorrow, we got Mario and John. Thanks to WinBet for your exclusive sponsorship all season long. And we'll be back at you again tomorrow on the Rotowire Fantasy Football Podcast. Take care.